The first day at a new job always carried that peculiar mix of excitement and nerves, but today, it was amplified by the presence of her, his new boss. I stepped into the office, my palms slightly clammy, taking in the clean lines of the space, polished wood desks, the faint aroma of coffee brewing somewhere nearby, and the subtle hum of fluorescent lights above. Everything felt orderly, almost serene, yet there was a current of tension in the air I couldn't quite place, until I saw her. She was standing near the reception desk, reviewing papers with an air of calm authority. At 42, she carried herself with a confidence that made the room feel smaller around her. Not in a domineering way, but in a way that drew attention without demanding it. Her hair was loosely pinned back, a few strands escaping to frame her face, softening the sharpness of her professional attire. There was something quietly magnetic about her, the way her posture was both commanding and unassuming, the subtle weight she carried as she moved through the office. As I approached, she looked up and gave me a small smile. It wasn't wide or theatrical, just enough to let me know she noticed me, that she was aware of the nerves I was trying to hide. When she extended her hand, it brushed mine lightly, an accidental, almost fleeting contact, but it left a strange warmth lingering in my palm. I caught my breath for a moment, startled by how such a small gesture could unsettle me so completely. She guided me to my workspace, explaining the layout and where to find files, the coffee machine, the printer. Her voice was calm, clear, with a subtle warmth that contrasted the precision of her instructions. I tried to focus on the words, but I kept noticing little things. The way her fingers lightly grazed the edge of the desk as she leaned over to point something out, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the air, the slight crinkle of her eyes when she laughed at something I said unintentionally awkward. Even in these brief interactions, I felt a magnetic pull, a curiosity that went beyond admiration for her professionalism. There was a rhythm to her movements, a subtle grace that made my own clumsiness feel more pronounced. I caught myself stealing glances, quickly looking away, and yet, each time our eyes met, she gave a small, knowing smile, as if she could sense my internal hesitations. The morning blurred in a mixture of orientation tasks and brief conversations. Every time she spoke to me, even about mundane details, I felt a quiet exhilaration, as if each word carried more weight than it should, each glance more significance. By the time the first coffee break arrived, I realized that the most unexpected part of starting a new job wasn't learning the workflow, but the slow, almost imperceptible fascination I felt toward her, the way her presence filled the office, the soft steadiness she radiated, and the subtle warmth I felt whenever we brushed shoulders or exchanged a glance. In that moment, I understood something profound. This wouldn't be just a job. Somehow, unknowingly, it was already becoming something far more personal, and far more delicate, than I had anticipated. By the second week, the rhythm of the office had settled, and I was beginning to feel slightly less like a guest in her world. She had already earned my quiet admiration, not just for her competence, but for the way she seemed to balance authority and approachability so effortlessly. Yet, even with familiarity growing, there remained a tension I couldn't ignore. It started innocuously enough. During a meeting reviewing the latest project metrics, I referred to her, half-jokingly, as boss. The words slipped out before I could stop it, and I immediately felt my cheeks heat. I expected a sharp reprimand or a look that would silence me, but instead, she laughed. Not a harsh or dismissive laugh, but soft, amused, and just a little surprised, like she hadn't expected me to be bold enough to speak so casually. "Stop calling me that," she said, her tone firm, yet carrying a playful undertone. She tilted her head slightly, the faintest arch of her eyebrow emphasizing the words. And then she laughed again, more freely this time, a sound that felt warm, like sunlight spilling across a room. I realized, in that moment, that her laughter had a weight. It lingered, it pulled me in, and it left a soft, almost tangible energy in the space between us. Later, as she handed me a stack of files, her hand brushed my arm lightly. The contact was accidental, casual, professional, but it sent a flutter through me I couldn't quite suppress. Her skin was warm, her touch brief yet loaded with an intimacy that was entirely unintentional. I tried to focus on the papers, pretending I didn't notice, yet every nerve in my body hummed with awareness. We started sharing more small, playful interactions after that. A raised eyebrow when I misread a chart, a gentle nudge when I fumbled with a stack of papers. Each gesture was so ordinary, yet charged with an understated significance I couldn't ignore. Her presence felt simultaneously grounding and exhilarating. I found myself leaning in slightly when she spoke, drawn not only to her words but to the way she said them, the subtle inflections, the slight laugh at the corners of her lips, the grace with which she gestured. Internally, I wrestled with conflicting thoughts. She was my superior, far older, and undeniably confident. But the warmth and humor she shared in those fleeting moments blurred the lines of formality. I was acutely aware of the age gap, the professional boundary, yet I also noticed the subtle signs that she enjoyed our light-hearted exchanges. There was a quiet curiosity in her eyes, a spark of amusement that mirrored my own. By the end of the day, I caught myself replaying every small interaction, the brush of her hand, the lift of her eyebrow, the warmth in her laughter, and realizing that the office felt different now. The air was charged with a quiet tension that wasn't uncomfortable, just undeniable. It wasn't a moment of romance yet, but the seeds were planted. Each laugh, each accidental touch, and every playful glance was a silent conversation between us, a prelude to something neither of us could fully articulate, yet both of us were beginning to feel. It was one of those evenings when the office felt unusually quiet. The hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound accompanying the occasional click of a keyboard as I tried to finish up tasks. Most of the team had left hours ago, leaving just the two of us in the vast, softly lit space. She looked up from her desk, noticing my lingering presence, and gave a small, understanding smile. There was a kind of unspoken permission in that smile, a quiet invitation that I felt drawn to. She suggested we go over some project details together, and somehow, the discussion soon strayed from work entirely. Her laughter was easy, spilling across the room and blending with the faint aroma of coffee left in mugs on nearby desks. I found myself telling her small personal stories, awkward moments from my career, brief glimpses into my life outside the office. She listened with intent, her head slightly tilted, eyes softened, and every so often she would nod or laugh in exactly the right spot. There was something grounding about her presence. When she leaned over to point at a chart, our hands brushed lightly. The touch was fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet I felt an electric warmth ripple up my arm. It wasn't just physical. It was the reassurance, the quiet steadiness of her hand moving across mine, a simple contact that spoke volumes about trust and connection. She shared pieces of herself too, stories of balancing her career with personal responsibilities, of navigating challenges that I could hardly imagine at her age. There was a vulnerability in her voice I hadn't seen in the bright, confident demeanor she carried in meetings. I realized that behind her poised exterior, she carried doubts and cares that were deeply human, and I found myself admiring her even more for it. We laughed together at little coincidences, small missteps, the kind of humor that makes silence feel comfortable rather than awkward. I noticed details I hadn't before, the way the soft light caught the curve of her cheek, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, the way her fingers toyed absent-mindedly with the pen she held. Each of these tiny movements felt intimate, like I was noticing layers of her no one else in the office did. At some point, she rested her hand briefly on my shoulder, not intentionally romantic, just a natural gesture of reassurance. But the warmth lingered far longer than necessary. My heartbeat quickened, and I found myself consciously trying to steady my breathing. There was no pressure, no expectation, only a shared quiet intimacy that neither of us wanted to disrupt. By the time we finally packed up to leave, I felt a subtle shift. The office no longer felt like a sterile workspace. It had become a space of shared moments, laughter, and trust. The boundary between professional and personal had softened, just slightly, leaving a quiet, unspoken connection in its wake. That evening, I realized that what had started as simple admiration for a confident, graceful boss was quietly transforming into something deeper, an awareness of her presence that tugged at my emotions and thoughts in ways I wasn't entirely ready to name. The office had settled into a quiet rhythm, a familiarity that made even ordinary tasks feel comfortable when she was around. By now, the initial awkwardness of my first days had softened, replaced by an eager attentiveness whenever she spoke. There was a delicate tension building between us, subtle yet undeniable, expressed mostly through gestures, glances, and fleeting moments of contact. It started small. While showing me how to organize the new filing system, her fingers lightly brushed the back of my hand as she guided me. The contact was incidental, yet the warmth lingered in a way that made my chest tighten. I tried to focus on the task, but her touch left a trace, soft, grounding, and charged all at once. I became acutely aware of the heat of her hand, the gentle pressure as she corrected my movements, and the way her proximity seemed to fill the space around me. Sometimes she would adjust my collar when my tie was slightly askew, her fingers brushing my neck briefly. The gesture was practical, nurturing, and yet it carried a subtle intimacy that I couldn't ignore. My mind replayed the moment long after, the lingering sensation of her touch intertwined with the warmth of her gaze. Her eyes often lingered on me longer than necessary, though always with a softness that suggested care rather than scrutiny. During lunch breaks or coffee runs, we began walking side by side. Occasionally, our elbows brushed or our hands grazed as we reached for the same item. Each contact felt deliberate yet casual, a dance of proximity and restraint. I noticed how she moved through the space, her posture fluid, her gestures graceful, and even her smallest actions, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve, seemed to radiate an understated elegance. Her laughter, too, became a conduit for connection. A small joke, a teasing comment, and the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, it all made the air between us feel lighter, yet charged with quiet anticipation. There were moments when she would pause mid-sentence, catch my glance, and smile in a way that held unspoken meaning. I felt the pull of those pauses, the magnetic draw of her attention, and the tension of unacknowledged desire simmering beneath our casual interactions. Internally, I grappled with my own emotions. She was older, my superior, undeniably poised and beautiful. Yet the warmth she radiated, the understated way she acknowledged my presence, and the fleeting physical contacts, all of it stirred something deeper than admiration. I wanted to reach for her hand, to linger in the moments we shared, but I also understood the boundaries that existed. Even in these subtle, seemingly mundane gestures, our connection deepened. The light touches, shared laughter, and moments of proximity became a language of their own, a quiet dialogue of trust, curiosity, and longing. Each interaction was a delicate balance of professional respect and personal fascination, laying the foundation for something that was slowly, irresistibly building between us. By the end of the day, I walked back to my desk with my mind alive with awareness of her, the warmth of her touch, the softness of her smile, and the electric charge of possibilities I hadn't yet dared to name. The subtle touches had transformed the ordinary into something extraordinary, and I knew that the tension between us was no longer just professional. That evening, the sky had darkened to a deep, gentle gray, and rain began tapping against the office windows in soft, rhythmic drumming. Most of the team had already left, leaving the two of us alone. The quiet was comforting but carried a weight, as if the room itself was holding its breath, aware of the unspoken tension building between us. She glanced at me, and our eyes met briefly, charged with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. When the rain grew heavier, she suggested we leave together. We shared an umbrella as we stepped into the wet streets, the world outside blurred by rain and reflections of streetlights on slick pavement. The umbrella forced us into closer proximity than usual, the edges of her coat brushing against my arm. It was a casual gesture, nothing intentional, yet the warmth of her body so near sent a thrill through me I couldn't ignore. As we walked, she laughed softly at my clumsiness, my foot narrowly missing a puddle. Her laughter was light, warm, carrying over the sound of the rain, and it pulled at me in ways I wasn't prepared for. When she nudged my elbow gently, it felt like more than playful teasing. It was a spark, a connection that made the air between us crackle with quiet energy. Her hand brushed mine as we adjusted our grips on the umbrella, and I felt a shiver, not from the rain, but from the proximity, the electricity of a moment suspended between familiarity and desire. There was a pause when we stopped at a traffic light, and our eyes met. She tilted her head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. For a heartbeat, everything else disappeared, the rain, the street, the world around us, and it was just us, suspended in a moment of unspoken understanding. I became acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her coat, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the rain-scented air, and the quiet steadiness of her breathing so close to mine. Internally, I wrestled with my feelings. The age gap, the professional boundary, and the uncharted emotional territory made my heart race, yet there was a grounding quality in her presence, a reassurance that made me want to linger in the moment, even if I couldn't name why. She noticed my hesitation and simply smiled, as if acknowledging without words the careful balance we were maintaining. By the time we reached the car, the tension had shifted into something tender, almost sweet. Her hand lightly brushed mine once more as she opened the door, and I felt the lingering warmth of her touch long after she stepped away. There was no need for words, no pressure to define the moment. Just the quiet acknowledgement of connection, of emotions acknowledged yet restrained, and a shared sense of intimacy that neither of us could ignore. That night, I walked back into my apartment with my thoughts consumed by her, the rhythm of her laughter, the warmth of her touch, and the lingering weight of proximity. The office, the rain, the umbrella, they were no longer ordinary objects but vessels for a memory etched with quiet tension and gentle, electric intimacy. It was a moment that neither of us would forget, a turning point where what had been subtle and unspoken began to feel undeniably present, and undeniably real. It was one of those rare evenings when the office seemed suspended in time. The hum of the fluorescent lights was softer than usual, and the desks, empty of the day's usual clutter, gave the room a quiet intimacy. We were alone again, lingering over unfinished work, but the task at hand had become secondary. There was a subtle shift in the air, a gentle acknowledgement that the unspoken between us could no longer be ignored. She glanced at me, and our eyes met with a quiet understanding. For a moment neither of us spoke, the silence heavy but comforting. I noticed how her fingers traced the edge of a notebook absent-mindedly, the soft movement revealing a nervous energy beneath her composed exterior. The way she shifted in her chair, her shoulders relaxing just slightly as she settled into the moment, made the room feel smaller, warmer, more personal. "I appreciate how sincere you are," she said softly, breaking the quiet. Her voice carried a weight that surprised me, not authority, but honesty. I felt my chest tighten at the words, the deliberate pause before she spoke giving them a tenderness that made my heart race. I wanted to tell her everything I was feeling, the admiration, the quiet fascination, the way her presence seemed to linger in my thoughts, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I spoke quietly, hesitantly, my voice nearly blending with the hum of the lights. I feel drawn to you. More than I should, maybe. But I can't help it." The words felt heavy as I said them, yet liberating in their truth. I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly replaced by softness, a gentle acknowledgement, not judgment. Her gaze softened even more, and she leaned slightly closer. Our shoulders touched, an accidental closeness that neither of us moved to correct. The warmth of her presence was grounding, comforting, yet charged with unspoken potential. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the movement intimate in its simplicity, and smiled quietly. "I'm glad you're honest with me," she murmured. There was a pause, a shared understanding hanging in the space between us. It was a moment of quiet confession, not grand or dramatic, but deeply human. Neither of us forced labels or expectations onto the moment. Instead, we allowed the vulnerability to exist, letting the tension between admiration, attraction, and respect simmer gently. Our connection didn't need words to define it. Every glance, every small touch, every pause spoke volumes. I noticed her breathing, steady but soft, the way her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled, the way her fingers rested lightly near mine on the desk, close enough to feel warmth but not overstep boundaries. In that quiet, suspended moment, it became clear that our bond had deepened beyond casual attraction or professional admiration. By the time we finally stood to leave, there was a gentle acknowledgement in our parting gestures, a hand brushing mine as we reached for the door, a shared glance lingering longer than necessary, and the quiet promise of more moments to come. The office no longer felt like just a workplace. It had become a space of trust, vulnerability, and the slow, deliberate beginnings of intimacy. The office felt different that morning. The hum of activity seemed lighter, almost buoyant, as if it too had absorbed the quiet shift that had taken place between us over the past weeks. I arrived early, my mind replaying the private moments we had shared, the subtle touches, the long glances, the laughter that had become a thread weaving us together. I felt anticipation, not anxiety, a gentle excitement at seeing her again, knowing that the connection we had fostered was real, mutual, and slowly unfolding. She was at her desk when I walked in, reviewing a report, her posture as poised as ever. Yet when our eyes met, her lips curved into a smile that was softer, warmer, and unmistakably personal. There was a sparkle in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken bond between us. For a heartbeat, the office and its usual distractions seemed to vanish. It was just the two of us, sharing a subtle intimacy that had grown stronger with each passing day. Throughout the morning, our interactions carried the weight of familiarity and the ease of trust. A hand brushed mine when passing a stack of papers, a shoulder grazed lightly as we worked side by side, and every accidental touch felt deliberate in its emotional resonance. There was no rush, no expectation, just the gentle unfolding of a connection built on respect, admiration, and quiet affection. I noticed the warmth in her presence, the soft sway of her movements, the careful way she listened, and it all deepened my awareness of her in a way that was both thrilling and comforting. At the end of the day, as we prepared to leave, I felt a nervous flutter, tempered by the reassurance of shared understanding. We walked together to the exit, the afternoon light spilling through the glass doors, casting long shadows that mirrored the calm intimacy between us. She paused at the door, turning to face me. Our hands brushed once more, brief, lingering, and I felt the warmth travel up my arm, a subtle electric current that was both grounding and exhilarating. "See you tomorrow," she said softly, her voice carrying the familiar warmth I had come to crave. There was a pause, a gentle smile, and then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned forward, her cheek brushing lightly against mine. The contact was fleeting, tender, and filled with meaning. I felt the steadiness of her presence, the quiet reassurance of her touch, and the thrill of shared closeness that needed no words. As we parted and I stepped into the hallway, I realized that everything had changed, yet nothing had been forced. The office, once just a professional space, had become a place of connection, laughter, and intimacy. Our bond was no longer tentative. It was real, mutual, and delicately woven with trust, affection, and the slow-burning spark that had grown over weeks of subtle moments. Walking away, I felt a warmth that wasn't just physical, but emotional, a gentle, satisfying knowing that we had found something rare. A connection that respected boundaries, acknowledged desires, and embraced the slow, deliberate rhythm of getting to know someone fully, deeply, and meaningfully. And I knew, with certainty, that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary.